Okay, so let's start again, and we're going to look at the Yoga Sutras. Now, in the Yoga Sutras, you will notice they're written about 2000 BC. So this is after the Buddha has been on the scene. What you will get is not only details of the theory of karma, you will also get some arguments now for the defense of karma. So the Yoga Sutras were written by this guy called Patanjali in about the 2000 BC, and it is one of the very important schools of the Hindu tradition. Remember, I said there is disagreement amongst the Hindus as well on various doctrines. So yoga, there is 6 important schools. Let me remind you again, because hopefully by the end of 12 weeks you will walk away at least knowing all the 6 Hindu schools, and throw these Sanskrit terms out at people easily in the pub. So there's the Nyaya, Vaisheshik, and there is yoga. Yoga is not just a system of exercises. It's very important. The notion of meditation and the notion of physical discipline is very important to yoga, but it is much more than that. So we will be looking at the Yoga Sutras. So what did I say? Nyaya, Vaisheshik, Yoga, Sankhya, Mimamsa, and Vedanta. And in this course, you will get a sense of, looking at least some of the text from all of these. So you get a sense of, what is going on. So it's the Yoga Sutras today, and I'm going to start by one of my favorite Yoga Sutras, which is number 9. If you've got the study guide, it's on page 45. On the handout, I tell you exactly in what order to read the Yoga Sutras, and if you've got it on Moodle, you can open up page 45, reading 1.1, number 9. So, this is what the sutra says. This is what the teacher says in Sanskrit, but I'll read it to you in English. The will to live, sweeping on by the force of its own nature, exists in this form, even in the wise. Very difficult to understand what might be said here. The will to live, sweeping on by the force of its own nature, exists in this form, even in the wise. So here's the commentary, might help us. In all living beings, this craving for oneself ceaselessly arises. May I not cease to live? May I live? This craving for oneself does not arise in one in whom the experience of death resides. And from this existence, of this hope, the experience of other births is made clear. And this is that well-known hindrance called the will to live. This fear of death, inconceivable as a result of either perception or inference or verbal communication, sweeping on by the force of its own nature as a vision of extermination, forces the inference that the pangs of death have already been experienced in previous births. So what you get here is an argument, an inference, which will give you an argument for rebirth. Why should we believe the Hindus, that there is rebirth after all? We don't have any memories of previous birth. Well, the Yoga Sutra explanation for why you should believe in rebirth and transmigration of the soul is that otherwise we do not have an explanation of fear of death. The fear of death is a universal phenomenon. That's why they say it resides even in the wise. And they go on to say, even in worms, even in a child, a newborn child, there is a fear of death. If you go with if you look at a very little infant, even a few days old, there's developmental evidence, give it a very angry look, or go as if you're attacking it, the child will start crying. The newborn infant will start crying. The Yoga Sutra argument is, how do you explain this? Even a worm quivers when you try and attack it and tries to slide away. How do you explain this in every living being? So the premise, it's kind of what is called the inference to the best explanation argument. The argument goes like this. There's something here that needs to be explained. What needs to be explained? The universal fear of death. All of us, every living being, not just human, every living being fears death. How could we have come to fear death? Well, the Yoga Sutra explanation is even because even a little child who is just born, who has not seen anything, so that's why they say, this fear of death, inconceivable as a result of either perception or inference or verbal communication. The child cannot understand language, the child cannot make any inferences. None of us have perceived, in this life we haven't perceived death. We've seen people dying, but we haven't perceived death. So what's the explanation for having this fear of death? It must be that we have been reborn in the past. I'll read you a little more. Think about this argument. Is it a good argument for believing in rebirth? Do people get the sense of the argument? There's something that needs to be explained. I mean, it's just like, an argument in science. There's something that needs to be explained. Well, what needs to be explained? Let me use an example, my favorite example. Why, when I drop anything, like this pen, I was going to drop my glasses, but they might break. If I drop anything, why does it go down rather than up or in another direction? Well, how do you explain this? You postulate gravity, right? You postulate gravity. Gravity is not something that is perceived. It is an inference. That's the nature of an inference to the best explanation. You postulate this other thing to explain this phenomena. Here, the phenomena that needs to be explained is the fear of death. And what do you postulate to explain it? The Hindus postulate that you have experienced death in the past, and that's why you have this desire, this urge to live. That's their argument. So everyone gets the basic structure of the argument? Something there that needs explanation. And the best explanation is that you must have experienced this in the past. So I'm going to read a little more while you think about it. So how do they think? What is this bit about, sweeping on by the force of its own nature? It has a disposition to sweep on by virtue of its own nature in the form of subconscious impressions. So the fear of death is like an instinct, a subconscious impression. We all fear death. Even the little child who can't articulate anything, who does not have a clear sense of anything, has this subliminal or, subconscious impression. It's like an instinct. But this disposition, this fear of death is not accidental. Even in the case of a worm just born that is full of pain and low in intelligence, this disposition is not accidental. The fear of death being inconceivable, that is, not acquired in this present birth. Fear of death is something we could not have acquired in this present birth. Why? As a result of perception or inference or verbal communication, it must be inferred that the pangs of death have been experienced in a previous birth. This is the point at issue, for even a child just born trembles at the sight of a murderous thing, and from this peculiar quivering of the child infers the nearness to himself of the experience of death and is found to be afraid of it. Thus, we see that fear results from pain or from whatever leads to pain. Moreover, in this birth, The child has not experienced, nor inferred, nor heard of death. So we gather that he has only in a previous birth the pains of death, or that which leads to the pain. And from this, a memory of himself as he was in that condition persists. So the idea is, the fear of death is a disposition that we all have, and the best explanation for this disposition is that we must have been born before. We must have experienced death in a previous lifetime. What do you make of this argument? Good try on behalf of the Hindus, do you think? I've given away the game by saying good try. But it's a nice argument, I think. Does it work? Is it successful?
It's not, obviously it doesn't work, but again, it's better to try. If you don't think of evolution, it's hard to think of any other reason why a child would have that instinct. Obviously, we know that. And maybe it's just survival. It's just been passed on for generations.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
How do you distinguish between fear of anger and the fear of death? The child may be trembling because the person is angry, not because they feel a
Right.
consequence on themselves.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Good.
Very experienced death, why would you be afraid?
Mm-hmm. It's something that you've experienced before, so good. I'll come to you.
They just scared of everything. They don't understand anything. It's so, like, you're born and you don't understand anything. If it's something that's not inherently comfortable, like warmth or something, you're probably going to be afraid of it or uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So,
Whether you think it's going to kill you or not.
yeah, you probably don't even understand that it's going to kill you at that time. Yeah.
So if you've experienced death before, you fear it. You would have experienced a lot of other things in your previous life as well. So does it also follow through that you'd fear something that you had a bad experience with in your other life, or you'll enjoy something that you've had a good experience with in your other life? Or is it just death because it's so extreme, maybe? Or, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, any other responses? Well, you can think of more. Let me, sort of try and bring, all of these are very good responses. Let me start there and then work my way back to the theory of evolution. All these things, you said fear of death, because probably it was a very vivid, very, sort of very painful, very intense experience, and that's what we remember. Well, that's what leaves an impression. They're not talking about memory. They're not talking about that you remember death. You don't remember your previous death. That's not the point. It continues, it is in you as an instinct. You fear death. And so the Hindus are not making these claims that you have clear memories or distinct memories of these experiences in the past. But we have certain, what is called instinctive responses to certain things. And the Hindus are going to use those instinctive. How do you explain instinctive responses? The response to death, or the response to someone attacking you, or to an angry face. These are instincts from previous lives. So it's not memory in the sense of remembering previous lives. They're not making that claim, because that claim cannot be. That's not a phenomena. We don't remember previous lives, so they cannot use that as a basis for an argument. Some great people or some people might remember. They've chosen very well here. They've chosen something that is universal, all living beings, and they give you examples. You might question this, but they've chosen a universal instinct, which is the fear of death. And that's a worry. So the idea is not clear memories, but instincts that are being explained. And so and there was the point about babies. Yes, babies are kind of afraid of everything that they don't understand. So is the point here that anything that one doesn't understand, one is afraid of? Novel experiences, is that the idea? Comfort, warmth. You said...
As a baby, as you grow older, you gain a better ability to understand things and to experience understanding things and not understanding things
Yeah.
So you can realise that even if you don't understand something, it's not inherently dangerous. As a baby, you haven't had to understand something. So
Right.
everything's
So the point is not that we fear things that we don't understand. The point is rather, as a baby, you just haven't made the distinction between, how to take things that you understand. And so maybe there's, something to say here. Maybe there's something like, because you yourself mentioned things like warmth and, comfort. There is this instinct to feel comfortable or, to get food, even though the baby doesn't begin by recognizing its mother. The baby doesn't, recognize anything. An infant, when it's first born, doesn't have the capacity to recognize at all. There is just this instinct that warmth is something that is good, and I think that's the kind of point that these guys want. This, from previous births, you've collected these instincts, and that's what is the minimal way that you're being guided as to how to begin responding to the world around you. And, our response to attack, our instinctive response to attack is fear. Even though we haven't been attacked before, if, God forbid, if there is a God, may he forbid, if someone comes into this room with a pistol or a knife and, runs in, we're all going to be scared. Right? That's an instinct. And that's even though we haven't been attacked before in this way, blah, 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 but the idea is, yes, there are some instincts and they need an explanation, and the Hindus are going to explain. So they will explain these positive instincts as well, which are universal. They could have just used a positive argument, food or warmth is something that is a universal instinct that all of us have. How do we explain it? How do we babies have that? All animals have that. Now, remind me of your point.
It was kind of similar to yours about, like, if you've already experienced death, like, how would you
Yes.
you're going to be reborn, so it's like,
Yeah, but you're going to be reborn, but that experience in itself might have been painful, very, very intensely painful. So you might want to avoid it. Just because I've experienced, as I was saying before, giving papers before, and I find them pretty painful. When I love teaching. It's not that I don't like teaching. I love teaching, but I don't like giving papers to a research audience where everyone's trying to get at you and thinking of objections all the time, because that's what philosophers do. But, it is something I've learned, so I try and avoid it. I try and get out of it as far as possible. So just because, I've experienced it before doesn't mean the pain goes away. I still have a memory of that pain, and that might be the reason to fear it. There still might be reasons for fearing it. So I'll come back to your point. I'll finish this lot of points, and then we'll do another round. Sorry, what was your point?
I said, how can you determine if, say, a baby or a worm which you can't communicate with what they're fearing?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, good. So it could be fear of other things. It could be just fear of pain, or it could be fear of something new. Sometimes, we fear something that we haven't experienced before. Why should we just, get to this conclusion that the best explanation is the fear of death? And that is something that seems to be a huge jump. So very good point there, that, there's a huge jump here being made. Can we fear something entirely new? Can I just ask you, for a moment to do this for me, to do this exercise? I'm not going to tell you what this is, but there's a thing called abracadabra. Just fear it for me. Can you do that? The next 2 seconds, fear abracadabra. How many people were able to do it? I'm just not a person who can scare you. That's why they're all smiling at me. But, unless you have a sense, if I won't tell you anything about something, it's difficult to fear it. If it's something that you haven't any sense of in the past, And this is a nice parallel. I'll remind you of this later on in the course. Can you desire something just as you cannot fear something? Can you desire something that you have never experienced before? This is a point that's going to come with the Nyaya argument for the self later, that, you know, the fact that we desire something means that we must have remembered it in the past as pleasurable. Otherwise, where does the desire come from? I mean, you know, use the same example. If I say, for the next 2 seconds, desire abracadabra for me. I won't tell you anything about what abracadabra is, but just do it for me. Desire abracadabra. Can you do that? How many were able to do it? You're still smiling at me. You know, so the idea is we need to have some concept of what we can fear, some idea, no matter how vague, of what we can fear or what we can desire. It's just impossible to say that if you have no idea, how are you going to fear it or how are you going to desire it? If you have no idea about a thing, I did this thought experiment, I asked you to fear something, which I won't tell you anything about, or desire it for that matter. And that's a difficult thing. So perhaps, you know, the sort of force of the argument comes from the fact that, you know, given that death is something we haven't experienced, we must have some idea of it from the past. Again, back to the point about instinct. We must have some idea of it from the past to, you know, worry about it. So it's just an instinct that is being explained here. And I mean, to some extent, it's a very good argument for why. Because something that is completely novel cannot be feared, cannot be desired. You know, so fear, the notion of fear, the notion of desire, the notion of, you know, wanting. Can you want something that you have no idea about? No, you can't want it. Because it requires a kind of emotional response. And an emotional response requires some understanding in some sense. Do people agree with that point? You can't have an emotional response if you have no idea of what that thing is. Right? So in that sense, I think it's a pretty good argument we have here from the Hindus that we have to explain this emotional response of the fear. Fear is an emotion. The fear of death has to be explained. And it is there in the newborns, in the worms, in the children, in the infants. How can we explain it? Yeah?
It's not the physical event that we are fearing. It's just that we fear not being able to live anymore. So shouldn't we be...
Yep. Interesting point. So it's not pain, it's not nothing, it's just not existing anymore. That is what we might fear. This becomes a bit tricky in the Hindu context because, you know, like the earlier point was from there, that, you know, if you've died in the past, you know you'll be reborn. So why? It's not non-existent. So it's actually a very good point against the Hindus saying that fear of death, the explanation for fear of death is fear of non-existence, not, you know, fear of not having been born in a previous life. It is the fear of non-existence. There's a better explanation, if you like, not an explanation that requires us to posit previous lives. Good point, you know, a better explanation. So they're giving what they regard as the argument of the best explanation. But here's another explanation, which might be, it is a fear of non-existence. That is, just to say this, you know, little thing in response to, on behalf of the Hindus, and I'm playing devil's advocate here, is to say that, you know, do little children and little beings like, you know, they say the worm with no intelligence, just newly born worm with no intelligence at all, do they have this sense of existence and non-existence? Again, you know, coming back to the same point, can I fear something that I have no idea of? And I think this fear of non-existence idea can be, to go back to the point about evolution, here's a better explanation for this instinct. It's not me who is reborn, and I have the fear of death. It's a result of evolution. A better explanation for this fear of death is that instincts are passed, instincts to survive, and other instincts are passed across generations. And that's going back to your response about the theory of evolution. We have a different explanation of the fear of death. The different explanation is that, as a result of evolution. But evolution doesn't say that I'm being reborn all the time. Evolution only says, generations of species, individuals, different individuals are being reborn all the time. And one might say, on behalf of the Hindus, I'm in a Hindu mood today, so I'm going to defend them as far as I can. One might say on behalf of the Hindus, well, the Hindus never say that, exactly the same person is reborn. You might be reborn in a different life, as a different creature, as a Brahmin, or, as a Shudra. You're born very different from what you were. So it's not as if the same individual, if you think of an individual, as much more. So you can kind of make the theory of karma consistent with evolution by saying it's generations of individuals that they were talking about. I mean, after all, the kind of beings, remember what we said about karma. Karma influences the kind of being you are. Karma influences the kind of being, the kind of physical capacities, physical characteristics you have. Karma is not just, an explanation of why you were born into that caste. Remember, I said last time, it's not just an accident that you're born into that caste. It is on account of your previous actions and the kind of body you have. It's also a natural explanation. The kind of body you have and so on is also on account of, so the kinds of dispositions you have, whether you have a strong body and the disposition to fight and you're a brave and a courageous person, is determined by your previous actions. So what karma determines is the kind of individual you will be. And karma never says you're going to be the very same individual. So one way of making sense of all this, and there are lots of, stories, if you like, and lots of incidents mentioned in the text, which talk about influences being passed on across generations. So they say, if the mother listens to good music and reads good books, reads good literature, it's going to have a positive effect on the fetus. It is going to have a positive effect. And, we all know about smoking and drinking, how that might have a negative effect. So, the idea can be, I know I'm stretching it. Don't look at me by saying, where are you taking this? I know I'm stretching it a little bit. But, one way to make sense of karma might be to think that it's very much like the theory of evolution in some sense. In some sense, though, I say, because evolution is not giving a moral explanation. Evolution is giving only a causal explanation of how things are, and how things. What karma does, the special thing that the theory of karma brings in, it's not just evolution, don't get me wrong. It is trying to give a moral explanation of every natural event, everything that exists. As someone asked me, what about someone who's born with serious, deficits, seriously, a baby who's seriously disabled? How do we, how could that be? How could that be justified? Well, karma can justify it, and a moral justification will be on account of previous. The kind of life you have is on account of previous karma. If I don't move on, I won't finish. Any other questions? Yeah.
This is similar to one you made earlier, but so the instinct that adults humans have to live better and more death, that life is inherently good, and that it's worth living, which kind of contradicts the notion of perpetual suffering that is life. So
Um, Good point. I haven't heard. Yeah, I mean, I think, as I said, I think there are troubles with the theory, and this is one of the troubles with the theory, that this seems to suggest that, something you fear has to be, so the point there is something you fear has to be something negative, right? And according to this, existing is not a positive thing at all. In fact, existing, because it's bound up with suffering, is negative. And so why should we fear not existing? Not existing should be a positive thing. We should, in fact, desire death. We should be happy. It shouldn't be the fear of non-existence, because non-existence is going to be... but notice here, now, back to defending the Hindus, notice here, it's not going to be, death is not going to bring non-existence. Death, in this sense, has to be understood as being reborn again. So death is not going to end the suffering in that sense. That is, in the Gita, very carefully, I might be able to find it. He says, death is like just changing clothes for the soul. It's like dressing up in a new body. So nothing happens to the individual. You're going to be reborn. Death is not non-existence in that final sense. But in itself, it might be a painful event, and that's why it's fearful. That's why we should fear it, because in itself, it might be a painful event, even though it's not, non-existence. And we fear things that are painful, that we have experienced before, Yeah?
Yeah, kind of similar to what you're saying. I think even if you know cognitively that if you die, you'll either be reborn or attain liberation, there's still the emotional or physical response. It's not going to be a pleasant experience. That experience is fear.
Yeah.
Even if you know better.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly right. Even if you understand you'll be reborn, it's no comfort to go and tell a dying man, it's okay, you'll be reborn. I don't think anyone's going to get any comfort from that. Oh, the theory of karma says you're going to be reborn. I don't think that's going to help.
Don't the Hindus sort of say and believe that we don't have awareness of moksha and of the cycle of birth and rebirth until you reach a human stage? So therefore, how can a worm have awareness of something like death, or even anything to do with the fear of death? If they already say that you can only have that awareness with
Right. Good. But I think that's a good point to make. There is no understanding, but as I said before, it's an instinct. It's fear of something. Even in a child, it's not fear of death, because the child has no concepts, no ideas at that time. Or in a worm, it can't be fear. It's just an instinct that this is something bad I should avoid. Something like that is going on here. And so you're quite right to say, because only in this form, sure, you don't understand karma and you don't understand how to get out of it, but that instinct still remains. Yeah?
Why is that a painful
Why is death a painful event? I think there's plenty of evidence for death being a painful event. Or the process of dying being painful. Usually people will have some kind of illness or something goes wrong, even if it's just old age. It's a pretty, it's the sort of, it's difficult to say what exactly death is, because I haven't experienced it, right? And I don't know how to take the testimony of people who say this after death experiences and they describe those experiences. I'm very skeptical about that, so I can't directly answer that question. But I think it's more, at least one can say that the process of dying is usually painful, for anyone, for all kinds of reasons. Even if when people say they're ready to go, they're suffering for something or the other. There is a lot of evidence for that. Yeah.
If the explanation for desire is that we've lived things beforehand and therefore we know what it's like and that's why we desire or fear, then our desires and fears are limited only to what we have lived in previous lives. So there's a possibility, maybe like very tiny mathematical actually lived many lives. There's a possibility that there's something that you might not be able to decide because you've never lived it in a previous life.
Yeah.
That seems a bit.
It is dodgy. Yeah. Yeah. It is dodgy. It is difficult. It is one of the, again, like I said, all existence is bound up with suffering. Another assumption is this cycle of birth and rebirth is unending. So it's not as if, this is where it started. The Hindus have no answer to the question, neither do the Buddhists for that matter. This is where it all started. It's not a first cause kind of theory. It's a circular account. That's why I say the circle of birth and death, the cycle. So it's meant to be a circular account of time. It's not this, Big Bang happened and then it all started. That's not the view. They have a cyclic process, and so you can't ask the question, what's the starting point at any place. They metaphorically sometimes say that, things were so bad, it all had to be destroyed and restarted. But even in the restarting, karma doesn't fall out. You still, even in the restarting, you're reborn on account of past karma. So I don't think that they're going to, everyone. Yeah, that's the view. Like it or not, but that's the view. Ready to move on to the next sutra? Fairly good try. You must give them that. It's an argument to the best explanation, nice argument strategy. In 2000 BC, nice argument strategy, I think, and a fairly good argument, very powerful. Let's look at the workings of karma a little bit, just to get the details of how it works. And I've given you, as I said on the handout, in what order you must read these Yoga Sutras. I know we're going a bit slow, but I think that's okay. This is your lecture and your tutorial, so feel free. This is a seminar. This is exactly how it's supposed to run. Feel free to interrupt me at any point. It's better that we, get the most out of it rather than me covering a lump of stuff and no one enjoys or understands what is going on. So, I think this is the perfect way of doing philosophy. So, I hope we continue like this. Okay, number 12 is the next one I would like to read. The latent deposit of karma has its root in the hindrances and may be felt in a birth seen or in a birth unseen. So the latent deposit of karma here means the karmic residue. This particular sutra, as you will see in a minute, is talking about the causes of the karmic residues, how the karmic residues are formed, and what the effects of those karmic residues are. So it's giving you the theory, the law. How does it work? On what account do you get the residues, positive or negative? And how do those play out? So this is what they have to say, reading the commentary after it. In this case, we have a latent deposit of the karma of merit and of demerit propagated from lust, or from greed, or from infatuation, and or from anger. So what are the causes of karma? Karma is basically caused by the motivation you have. If your actions are motivated by lust, or by greed, or by infatuation, or by anger, you are going to acquire karma. They also have a fifth, they talk about 5 things that might cause. Ignorance is another one that will come. So 4 things: lust, infatuation, greed, what happened? And anger. But notice that they can be responsible for both positive and negative karma. It is not just that they will always give you negative karma. Being infatuated with your partner is the right attitude to have at a certain, I talked about the Hindus not sort of suggesting celibacy or anything like that. It's very important to enjoy sexual pleasure. That is one of the almost the duties you have to perform as a householder. So being infatuated with your partner and enjoying, is a good thing. Anger can sometimes lead to, a good action. So it's not, don't take them as being negative attitudes. There is, in fact, in the commentary, anger there is the idea. Merit, however, this is on top of page 47, merit does, however, come from anger, as, for instance, the case of Dhruva from anger at the slight put upon him by his father. If your parents tell you something wrong and you respond to it, or, you respond to injustice, being angry, you respond to injustice in a certain way, that's not a bad thing. But the point here is, these things, they cause merit or demerit because you're not doing something, you're not motivated in this emotionless way just because it's your duty. You are, in fact, when your motivations are more than just duty for duty's sake, you're going to get positive or negative karma. So according to the latent deposit of karma is a result of these hindrances, these 5 things. And what do they mean by? And this may be felt either in a birth scene. Birth scene means this particular birth. So they leave it open whether, the result of your actions will be felt in this birth or in a birth unseen. So that means not this birth, but in future births. Of these, that latent deposit, which insofar as there is keen intensity, so if the karmic residue, what determines when they will take fruit depends on the intensity of the karmic residue, the intensity with which you perform action. If the action is very, very bad, so the physical act also, the physical act that you perform. So motivations count, the physical act count, and also you will see in a minute for the Hindus, the immediate consequences of the act also matter. So it is not, some people say, oh, the Hindu ethics is just like Kantian ethics. It's deontological, duty for the sake of duty, nothing else matters. The Hindus do not completely ignore consequences of an action. If an act has good consequences, that is going to affect the quality of the karma. Sure, they're deontologists and say duty for the duty's sake, but they do take into account good karma. So if you jump into, this is an example used by Peter Singer. You might have come across it if you've done first year philosophy. If you jump into the pond to save someone, even though you've got your best shoes on or something, they're going to get really spoiled. And if you do this calculation, the Hindus will say, if you jump into this pond, just, that's not anyone's duty to jump into ponds and save children who are drowning, right? That's not part of the duties laid out. This is just, if you like, an optional action. But if you just do it because of instinct and you save the drowning child, without looking for positive karma, without wanting something out of the action, you're going to get, that's going to be a good thing. You get good. So karmic, the meritorious or, positive karma is determined by 3 things, according to the Hindus. It is determined by the intentions that you have. It is determined by the physical act that you perform. And it is also determined by the immediate consequences. So another example that is given in the literature is, suppose someone goes out to hunt. They have an intention to kill. Killing is something bad, according to the Hindus, killing deer. So you have formed the intention, but actually you're not successful that day. Do you blame the person or do you not? Well, the Hindus will say some negative karma will be had, even though no act happened. They weren't actually able to carry out that intention. It had no bad consequences, if you like. You will still accrue some negative karma. And again, from the other side, if you did not have the intention, but you end up doing something bad, you will still get some negative karma. So, right? Intentions matter, acts matter, and immediate consequences matter. These three things determine the kind of karmic residues you will gain. So here's, talking about what kind of effect these karma had. I'm not reading all of it, I'm reading bits, because all of it is a bit tedious. So just as the youth, Nandi Charva, passed out of the human form and was transformed into divinity, so you can go higher up the ladder, so also Nahusa, the prince of gods. So even in heaven, you're not safe, you can be demoted. Passed out from his proper mutation and was transformed into the condition of a brute. So you can go up or you can go down. And what are the sorts of things that are determined by these? This is what they have to say. The latent deposit of karma, which is the cause of, so these are the effects of karma. The cause of birth, that means what caste you are born into, of length of life, of kinds of experiences. So all three things are determined. What caste you will be born into, how long you will live. So anyone, who dies as a young, like we were talking about disabled children, even a child might die at birth. Again, they're going to say that's not just an accident, it happened because of the previous karma of that being. So all these things are determined, and the kind of experiences, whether you will have a good life or not, whether it will be a pleasurable life or not, or a painful life, all those things are determined on account of karma. There's no room left for accident at all. So just so merit, which is the cause of heaven and similar states, occurs when, as a result of some desire, there's an inclination for a work which is desirable. So you get positive karma when you have desire, but you have desire for doing good. You have desire for doing your duty because you want something out of it. Similarly, there is demerit in cases as when from bad intentions another is robbed of his money, or that's why I'm saying the actual action also matters, not just the intention. So there is nothing but demerit in such cases as when from infatuation you are led to kill something. You just kill someone because you're so infatuated with this other person, that's going to lead in a lot of demerit. This one last thing about the cooking pot. It's in this sutra that they talk about the cooking pot. So the dwellers in the underworld. So just as they talk about being born higher into heaven, you can be born into earth. They also talk about being, are those who make latent deposits of karma, as a result of which certain underworlds, such as the cooking pot, are reached. These have no latent deposits to be felt in a birth scene. In your birth as a cooking pot, there is no thing that one might feel for no human body, nor any kind of living thing. Any mutation of it can endure such torment as is to be endured by them. So if you've been really, really bad, you can be reborn as a cooking pot and have to suffer a lot, but it will not be a kind of existence where you actually have to feel the pain. Because, it's not a good existence because you can't go higher. You can't experience anything, for example. You can't experience pleasure or pain, but you don't even have the possibility, of making the best of it. It's not a good experience, but it's not a painful one, because being born as a cooking pot would be really, really painful. And that's an important insight. Pain doesn't actually have to be felt. It's existence which is bad. Pleasure and pain are not really, and I'll come to that. I can't quite come to that. Time is up. I saw some people moving, suggesting that time is up, and it is up. Okay, we'll start with this next week. I better not try and read anymore. So we're going to talk about the problems with the theory of karma and just finish this discussion about the theory of karma. read the paper for next week. Again, there is an essential reading. It's quite fun, and it discusses this logical paradox that was talked about, duty for the sake of duty. See you next week.